Hi guys, welcome to the fourth episode of our tutorial on setting up a gRPC server in Go. And in today's tutorial, we're going to be taking a look at actually implementing the server for our inventory microservice. Cool, so for implementing the inventory microservice, what we need is some form of database to store our various products. And so for the purposes of this demo, I've chosen to use Google Cloud Firestore, which is a NoSQL database that stores data in a really cool way. So if we just take a look at the data structure here, the way that Firestore is broken down is into documents and collections. And so, for example, in our use case, a collection would be products. And within the products collection, we're going to have a document that represents each product that we are keeping track of in our store. And so, yeah, I'm not going to dive into too much detail on the sort of nitty-gritties of how Firestore works because our use case is very, very basic and just for demonstration purposes. But if you're interested, yeah, go and check out the documentation for Firestore and see like its full capability and how you guys could use it. So in this tutorial, we're also going to be making use of the Cloud Firestore emulator. And so what this is that basically when you want to use Firestore, you would typically have to have a Google project set up. And it's a little bit more complicated than just your sort of local development flavor. And what the Firestore emulator allows us to do is to create a sort of locally emulated instance of Firestore where we can write documents and read documents as if it were a real Firestore backend that existed in a Google Cloud project. And so sort of to kick off that process, we're going to run a Firebase init emulators. And so yeah, you guys are going to have to install the Firebase command line tool for this. But what we're going to want to do is, yeah, we're not going to set up a default project because there's no project that this is pointing to. And we're simply interested in the Firestore emulator. Cool, and we're going to hit enter. Let's make it at port 9090 because most of our gRPC servers are running on 8080. Yeah, and let's just port you want to use for the emulator UI 9091. Would you like to download emulators now? Yes. Cool. So now we've initialized our project with the necessary Firebase information, and you'll see that it's dropped some config files over here. So this firebase.json specifies some of the settings that we just specified, and we've got a .firebase.rc which is empty for now, and it's added a .git ignore to ignore some of the sort of helper files that Firebase is going to create. And yeah, now we can spin up our emulator by running a Firebase emulators start. Cool, and so now we've got a local instance of Firestore running at port 9090. So now that we've got a Firestore instance running, we need to set up a client connection for this instance to be able to read and write and to it and list documents and just to be able to interact with Firestore in general. So in our server.go, we're going to set up a Firestore client. So we're going to create a variable that's accessible across the main package, and we're simply going to call it Firestore client. And this is going to be a Firestore client. So yeah, I think just something that's important to note is you need to add this Firestore Go package to be able to access the various Firestore objects and methods. Cool. So we've created this variable, and what we now need to do is create the actual connection to it. So in Firestore, there is a method called new client. And this is what we are going to use to create the client. So we're going to pass it an empty context, new context. And the project ID in our use case isn't important since it's just a locally emulated instance. And so you can actually pass this any string. So I'm just going to say fake project for now. And yeah, we see that new client returns the client object, which is what we're interested in, and an error. And so we're going to set our Firestore client and an error to equal this and instantiate an error object at the top here. Cool. Oops. So yeah, if an error occurs while setting up the client, then we want to log the error and exit the program, because without our Firestore client, we're sort of pretty, yeah, can't really do much. So I'm going to say here, failed to create Firestore client. And pass it the error. And so yeah, I think if some of these things look a little bit unfamiliar to you, it would be good to just sort of get a bit of a familiarity with Go first. So like this log.fatalf, the F at the end indicates that this is a formatted string. And so it allows us to add this little $S followed by the error message behind it. But yeah, we've now set up our Firestore client, and we can start using this and implementing our business logic for creating, getting, listing products, etc. So with this Firestore client, we're now going to go and start with implementing the create method. So just looking at how this method is structured over here, we see that the create product takes in a context, which you don't really need to concern yourselves with too much for now. And it takes in a request message. And this request message contains all the details we need to be able to create a product in the backend. So whenever we write gRPC methods, the first step is that we always want to validate the incoming request message. So I'm going to say here, validate the request message. And typically those validations would take on two forms. Firstly, we want to check that all of the required fields have been provided by the user or the client. And secondly, we want to validate the actual contents of the arguments provided. And so I'm not going to be too concerned about validating the contents for now, but I do want to check that the required fields are provided by the client. So firstly, we expect to receive a product to be created. And if a product isn't created, we want to return a gRPC error with code invalid arguments, and we're going to say product is a required field, but was not provided. And then similarly, yeah, so I suppose that's sufficient for now. So we've ensured now that the user has provided a product, and we can proceed. So the next important thing is, if we just sort of refer back to the proto that we defined in our previous episodes, there's this whole concept of the resource name for a product. And so this resource name isn't something that the user is going to give us. It's something that's derived from the barcode of the product. And so in our use case, we don't actually have a barcode. And so this name is sort of going to be set in the back end. And we're just going to assign it some unique identifier in the interim. And so the next step is that we need to sort of create this name. And so Go has a cool UUID package that we can use, and we're simply going to say UUID.newString. What's going on here? UUID dot okay, something funky is going on with that library. Okay, let's try again. So we want a and let's just run a go mod tidy to make sure that the library, this UUID library is available. Cool, yeah, sorted. Okay, so this is gonna hold a sort of unique identifier now. And we want to assign the product its name, which is gonna consist of the word products followed by this unique ID. Cool, so we've now set the name of our product as product followed by the ID. And so now the last step really is that we want to add this product to Firestore. And so the way we're going to use this is by using our Firestore client, and we're wanting to create a document in Firestore. And the path of this document is going to actually map to the name of the resource itself. And so this is something that's actually really cool about the naming conventions that the AIPs provide, is that the resource names map to many NoSQL implementations, in the sense that product/product ID is an exact one-to-one mirror of the Firestore sort of architecture when it comes to storing documents and collections. And so we're simply going to use the name that we've just assigned to the product, and we want to create a new document. And we're going to propagate the context that's coming into this method. And the second component of this create is that it takes in any interface. And an interface is basically just some object that we want to drop on this document. And so in our case, what we want to drop is the incoming product in the request. And then, yeah, last step is that we just want to handle our errors. So the right result, not too important, but we want to make sure that we handle our errors correctly. Cool. And yeah, part of what is returned by the create product is the product that we have just created. So we're going to return this product that we have created. Cool. So now we can quickly implement the get product method as well. And so when we look at the get product method, it takes in a get product request, and all the get product request consists of is simply the name of the product that we're interested in. And so that's going to look like this: product/product ID. So we're going to retrieve a document from Firestore by calling on firestore.doc, and the path is going to be equal to the name of our request, and we want to get the document. So if there's an error Oopsie. If there's an error, we again want to return this to the user. Otherwise, we want to return the product of interest to the user. And so when we look at what's returned by this Firestore client.document.get, we see that it returns to us a document snapshot. And so a document snapshot obviously isn't a product. And we need to thus convert this document into the product that the user is expecting to receive. And so the way we do that is by creating firstly an empty product object, and by then using this cool method called data2 that exists on the document snapshot object. And what this does is takes whatever data is contained within that document and passes it into the respective object, if they are obviously of the right format, by comparing the fields and then populating the data accordingly. And so we can just drop the document data on this product object. And again, we want to handle our errors correctly. Not equal null, return null error. Cool, and then we're gonna return this product that we've just gotten. So yeah, that is the sort of get method. Yeah. So just to show you guys that these methods actually are working, we're gonna generate some basic tests, but I don't want to really call them tests. I more want to call them client interactions with our server. And so the way we're going to do that is by setting up a new Go file called methods_test.go. And we're going to create a test method for our create product and get product. So I'm just going to use some help from my IDE here, but I don't want the actual body here. And then we also want one for the get. Cool. So in order to interact with my server, I first need to set up a client connection to the server. And so we're going to simply do that in a top level init function in this class. And yeah, the way that's going to look is that we want to have a client that's accessible across this package, which is going to be of type PB inventory client. And we then want to set up the gRPC connection and connect our client to the host. And so if we go back to our server, we'll see that this inventory server is going to be running on port 8080 since we haven't specified any port in our environment variables. And so that's where we're going to set up our client connection to point to. Cool. So in the init, we're going to create a gRPC connection to port 8080 by running a gRPC.dial. And we need to import the gRPC package, Go package, which is this one over here. So we're going to call a gRPC.dial, point it to localhost 8080, and then yeah, again handling our errors. So if we fail to connect to our server, then we want to fail hard, so we're going to log our error and fatal, and then we're going to use this connection that we've just created to instantiate a client. So we're going to say new inventory client and point it to the connection that we've just created. Cool. And so that's our client set up for the inventory server. So now, let me just show you guys, sorry. So yeah, that's our client set up for the inventory server. And so now we can actually call the create and get methods on this client. And so we'll set up the request message for a create product. And the way that's going to look is a create product request and populating it with an empty product. So pb.product. And yeah, we don't need to give it a name, but we do need to give it the rest of the information. So let's create Hellman's mayonnaise. And its price is going to be $69.99. Quantity, we've just got 100 in stock. And it's going to be under the food category. Cool. And then we want to make a hit to our client and call the create product method. So this create product method takes in a context. And so we're just going to give it a context.background and it wants to take in the create product request. And so we're going to pass it the request that we've just populated. And then again, if we receive an error, then fatal, otherwise log the response. So yeah, let's spin up our server and give that create method a test. Cool, so over here we've just spun up the server. And if we now run our test method, oh, sorry, one last thing is that we need to specify here, since we're just connecting to our local host, that it's insecure. And another thing is that since our Firestore client is local, it needs to make use of this environment variable called Firestore emulator host. And so if it doesn't pick up this environment variable, it's going to assume that you're actually pointing to a real Google project. And so we're just going to add a little check here. So if you have set your Firestore emulator host environment variable, it will use that. Otherwise, it's going to set it to point to localhost 9090 as we had it, as we configured it to. Cool, so I think that should resolve it. So let's restart our server. And let's execute that create. Cool. So seems like our product has successfully been created. Let's get it from the database to confirm this. So we want to make a get product request and populate it with the name of the product. So in this case, it's going to be the name of the product that was just created. And then we simply make a hit to the get product method, pass it a background context, and the request. If there's an error, we're going to want to fatal, otherwise print the response. Cool, and there we go. We successfully got the product. And just to show you guys, let's create another product. Maybe let's do Nola Mayo. That's only $52.99, and we've got 150 of them. So let's create another product. We see here product has been created. So let's try and get that product from our database. Cool, and so we've successfully got the product. So yeah, I think that's enough for one episode. I'll finish up the list and delete and update methods with you guys in the next episode.